Good evening. It was a metric mix-up. Air Canada has confirmed the plane that landed at Gimli, Manitoba last Saturday ran out of gas because of an error in metric conversion. The pilot thought he still had thousands of kilos of gas. In fact, he had only a few pounds. John Fitzgibbon reports.
So you're probably wondering, what is the Gimli Glider? Well, the Gimli Glider is a nickname given to an Air Canada flight in 1983. After the plane completely lost power while flying, the crew was forced to actually glide the aircraft to an emergency landing. So the next question is, why did this even happen? So about halfway through the flight, the plane actually ran out of fuel. Thus, they lost all power and most controls, and they were then forced to glide it, much like a paper airplane, to safety. So now, how in the world did something like this occur? After the investigation, it was concluded that a culmination of miscues, human errors, and company failures caused this disaster. In fact, the main culprit was the fact that someone couldn't do some simple measurement conversions. But we'll get back to that a little bit later. So now let's take a look at how this whole thing actually went down. The hours leading up to the flight were noted as normal. It first flew from Toronto to Edmonton, where it underwent an inspection. Then, it flew to Montreal, where a crew change occurred. After that, it finally tried to fly to Ottawa, where everything just went wrong. Now let's take a look at the empty fuel tank. While flying at about 41,000 feet, a fuel pressure alarm went off, but the pilots simply thought nothing of it and turned it back off. The computer also stated that there should be enough fuel to finish the flight. Also, it was noted in the log that the fuel gauges didn't even work. Thus, that's why the pilots didn't make a big deal out of these alarms. But moments shortly after that, a second alarm goes off and things get real. The engines fail. The pilots are then forced to make an emergency landing, but suddenly lose all power on the plane. This means no electronic controls or instrumentation. This is a foreign situation for the pilots, as they have no forward thrust and can therefore have very little control over their plane. Let's take a quick look at how this happened.
By using his rudders and ailerons to change the angle of the plane. Crossing the controls involves tipping the wings in one direction, but turning the aircraft in the opposite direction, pushing it sideways into the oncoming air. As Flight 143 begins to drop towards the Earth, Quintel is about to discover something he did not expect. The runway he trained at 15 years ago.
All right, now I just
Is no longer a runway.
So, how did they actually end up landing the plane? Well, as lucky as can be, the pilot, Captain Pearson, was actually an experienced glider pilot. They quickly determined that they were falling way too quickly and would not make it to Winnipeg. Thus, they changed their target to the Gimli Air Force Base. Little did they know that the base has actually been turned into a racetrack. But fortunately, they were able to maneuver and slide the plane, land it, and did so without suffering any casualties. So now comes the big question. What was the root cause of all this? The main culprit of this was a massive refueling error. When Air Canada acquired the 767, it was the first to change from imperial to metric units. It was calculated that 22,300 kilograms of fuel were needed to complete the flight from Edmonton. Afterwards, the crew calculated how much fuel was needed to fly to Ottawa. Basically, they needed to convert volume into weight, subtract that from the necessary weight, then convert it back to volume. The correct amount of fuel to be added was 20,088 liters. The flight crew calculated 4,916. That's a bit off. So how in the world did these guys screw up simple math? What a silly error! The crew calculated the weight in pounds, not kilograms. They forgot to change from imperial units to metric units. In doing so, they used the wrong conversion factors and passed those same calculations to succeeding pilots. This error propagated and resulted in half the necessary amount of fuel necessary to complete the flight from Edmonton to Ottawa. Thus, they ran out of fuel halfway through. In the end, the pilots and flight crew were suspended for several months. After this event, every country but the US switched to metric units. Also, a flight engineer has been assigned to every flight to focus and ensure that these calculations do not get messed up again. Overall, what this shows is that unit conversion errors can have catastrophic effects. And as long as the US sticks with imperial units, these conversion errors will always be prevalent. Also, examples of such recent incidents that involve unit errors are the Mars Climate Orbiter and also Space Mountain in Tokyo Disneyland.